Well, thank you everyone for attending this evening. Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? For all the masses online as well, I hope you can hear me. And thank you so much, Senator and Delegate Solomon, for taking time out of your busy schedules to talk with us today. We've received some questions in advance, but I really wanted to just start out by thanking you all for your continued leadership and compassion and earnestness towards making Montgomery County just a better place to live for all of us and future generations. We also wanted to thank you for spearheading getting the additional $500,000 in funding towards the Bethesda Market Park. It's a very exciting project for our communities, our surrounding communities, and we're in the middle of a set of discussions surrounding a budget gap and getting towards site plan and all that good stuff, but we're going to certainly keep you informed as this progresses, which hopefully will be leading to a site plan submittal soon, and or at least letting you know how things go. But we're all very excited about that. We're also grateful for all that you have done with respect to the East-West Highway crosswalk and the red light signalization promise that we've received from SHA. Frankly, if it were not for your involvement, we would not be there at all. And that's something that's quite important given Purple Line, as well as the Sleaford Pass and underpass, I should say, opening, and the hope that more and more people are using that for biking and walking and exploring our great area. So thanks. That's just a couple of examples of just the leadership that you're providing on a daily basis for our community, and we're really, really appreciative of that. We do have a few questions, and I don't know how much time the answers to or the discussions will take necessarily. Maybe we might be able to expand it to the audience as well for those who are here. But what we thought we'd start out with is just a few things. First is respect to gun safety. So Senator, you were able to be with us a month and a half or so. I think it's early June or something like that, where you talked about the spearheading of legislation, gun safety legislation at the state level. And we were wondering if in the fall, what your plans were, maybe the delegation's plans were, with respect to bringing in more gun owners to the table so that there could be more common sense solutions at the state level. Obviously, it's an iterative process. It's, but Maryland being in many cases the leader for the nation, this is definitely another area. So that's one side. Is there anything as a municipality or municipalities in general can do to help in this regard? And you just asked me, sorry, turn that on. Yeah, sorry, I should have said
to
that.
green. Got it. Well, thank you for having us this evening. We really appreciate it. It means a lot to us to be able to visit our municipalities, and the town of Chevy Chase, I think, is probably our largest municipality, maybe town of Kensington. But yes, tonight you're the, and we also appreciate your having us on July 4th, which was a wonderful event as always. We have 6 or 7 events that day. But for me, my family, this is how you know yours is the best. My family does not accompany me to any of those events except for the town of Chevy Chase. Right. They know that they can get great barbecue and wonderful ice cream. So thank you for having
There you go.
On the issue of gun violence. So Delegate Solomon and I, as well as Delegate Shetty and Delegate Kaufman, who will be here shortly, have been helping to lead the charge on gun violence issues since the Supreme Court case last June called Bruin. And Bruin really changed the game for how this issue is handled. But as we went through the process of passing a 3-bill package that we believe to be the strongest in the nation when it comes to gun safety, there's no question we were working directly with gun owners and Second Amendment advocates because they are best positioned to help us understand how they use their guns or store their guns on a daily basis. And so understanding, what the norms are for people who own guns, shoot guns, hunt with guns was important to us as we sought to regulate where they can and cannot be located. So as the 3-bill package that we passed will go into effect October 1st. And what you should know as a municipality is that guns are disallowed in government buildings. The Bruin case said that certain sensitive areas were places that government could regulate and say guns are not allowed. And this, as a government facility, will be one of those places. And so what can you do to help? Well, publicize the law. One of the points we made on the floor in both chambers is that the law is not designed to jam people up. The law is not designed to trick anyone, to catch anyone off guard. The law is designed to reset norms in a post-Bruin world. And one of those norms needs to be no guns inside government facilities. And so educating your neighbors about that new norm, I think, will be a critical next step in the process of gun safety in the town.
Okay, thank you.
So just to sort of add on to that, and again, thank you for having us. My son came with me to the Kensington Bike Parade and then was overwhelmed with sugar and heat for the rest of the day. Is only 3. So it was just me for your July 4th celebration, but I'm sure when he's older, he will appreciate your ice cream is definitely better than the rocket pop that he had earlier. But just to address the gun piece, I can imagine that there's probably more in the works that leadership on both sides of both the House and the Senate are thinking through as issues pop up. And obviously, certain issues may continue to be challenged at some point going forward. But one of the bills that I did want to mention that I had introduced last year that we passed out of the House and just kind of ran out of time in the Senate is an issue that I think really resonates, frankly, with parents and gun owners across the board. So the bill addresses the way in which schools conduct active shooter drills and trainings. And really changes sort of the paradigm to make sure that they're not a surprise to families, they're not a surprise to staff and students. We had one really terrible incident at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School where it was a drill, or actually I can't remember if it was a drill or not, but it was, nobody knew, and people were terrified. And so we worked with a really great group of young leaders from across the state. We also worked with the Maryland Center on School Safety. We worked with law enforcement to get a bill that change the way in which those drills and trainings are conducted. There have to be mental health resources available. Again, there has to be some sort of advance notice so it doesn't come out of left field. There also has to be a follow-up notification after they occur so that families don't get surprised. I had a colleague who actually told me she picked up one of her kids from school and was told when she asked, what had he done that day? Oh, we pretended to be dead for 3 hours. And that was the first time that she had heard it. The other piece in the bill that we're incredibly, I think, excited about and is going to be a great step forward and something that had, unanimous bipartisan support in our chamber was to make sure that our school systems send home information on our state's safe gun storage laws. So at least once a year. And we, with the leadership of Jeff and folks in our chamber, passed a bill that overhauled our safe storage laws. So that's even more relevant. And as far as I know, we would only be the second state behind California that would require school systems to send that information home. So that is something, happy to share the information on that bill. As I started my career as a high school teacher, and as I talk to families, that almost is something more sort of front and center and a daily part of young people's lives, unfortunately, who attend really any schools. So that's something, if the town is interested in taking a position on, MCPS was actually very supportive of the bill. And certainly, we would welcome more support and more conversation on it as well.
Yes, please do send that information along for sure. Thank you. And I see, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, so Maryland does have a red flag law. It has been quite effective. It's most effective, kind of going back to your question, it's most effective in jurisdictions that have advertised the ability of citizens to utilize this. Of course, it's not just citizens that can utilize it. Police can also do so. So while we pause for a second, let me introduce Dave Kuhns in the back. Dave, you're welcome to come up if you prefer. Dave is the Chief of Staff to Delegate Emily Shetty, who is out of town. So please join us.
I was going to say, and just to add to Jeff's comment, Barney, I believe the Supreme Court is hearing a case on red flag laws.
Domestic violence.
Yeah. So hopefully we won't have to dramatically amend.
Aaron, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes. My name is Delegate Aaron Kaufman. I apologize. My name is Delegate Aaron Kaufman. I apologize for being late, but we are a citizen legislature, which means that most of us have other jobs, me included. So I was coming from downtown in rush hour, but it's an honor to be with the people of the town of Chevy Chase. One of my mentors, the sadly, the late Jane Lawton, was very active in the town as the mayor and a member of the council. And then my aunt, Abby, she lives on Woodbine Street in the town. So I have a great deal of affection for the town. And I just want to say it's been a joy to represent you for this past session. I was elected in November, in part because of the fellowship and friendship of these men and Delegate Shetty. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Well, now we go to another fantastic topic of job creation. Delegate Solomon, last time that you were with us, you talked about the health computing initiative, which sounded like a very exciting step forward. Basically, there's a provision of, as I understand, incubator spaces that could contribute to job growth. It takes advantage of just the area universities as well as, of course, NIH and other resources that we have in the area. So what other job growth industry initiatives are in the pipeline amongst you all thinking about it for the next session or other areas like that?
Yeah, well, I will start. So, first of all, the Health Computing Institute is going to be, we're not done yet. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's actually been sort of under the radar. I think we need to do a much better job of advertising it. So the county last fall signed an MOU between the county, the University of Maryland College Park, University of Maryland Baltimore County, University of Maryland Medical System, a couple of other entities within the university system to create what is really potentially or has the potential to be one of the most important initiatives in both science and computing really in the world. It's bringing the artificial intelligence and computing know-how and expertise within the university system and the medical database and records and know-how within the University of Maryland medical system and the medical school, and sort of combining the two. So the best example I would give is, if you're in drug development, whereas now you have to do trials and you need wet lab space, a lot of that can now be done through artificial intelligence and supercomputing. And so we are now going to have a center at North Bethesda, just where the current metro is. There's a parcel of about 16 acres of just kind of vacant space. And the plan is to essentially have a flagship building that would be a partnership again with the university system and a couple of other entities, creating a second metro entrance there, and essentially activating and developing that 16 acre parcel of land, which the county and university system estimate could actually bring more potential square footage of economic development than even the Amazon second headquarters would. We're spending a lot less money in tax breaks on it. So it's really, really helpful. So we are in the very early stages of actually sort of building the building out. So right now the university system has set up the very beginnings of the Institute. I think they're renting a floor or two of a building across Rockville Pike in the Pike and Rose development. And so it's probably going to be 4 or 5 years before the building itself actually gets constructed. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure the infrastructure money for the metro entrance gets put in. We've pre-funded a lot of the infrastructure work to make sort of the parcels usable, like putting in utilities, putting in a street grid, but the actual money for the building still needs to be funded. So we're actually probably in the next couple of weeks going to have sort of initial interim conversations with the university system around the capital budget. There needs to be a dedicated source of money for the actual research piece of it as that expands. What's also really exciting is the universities at Shady Grove is going to be doing local internships. And so there's going to be a pipeline and most of USG students tend to be homegrown Montgomery County residents, which is great. There's going to be a pipeline of locally grown, often Montgomery College graduates as well, who are going to be able to intern and work at that. And I think the university system has brought in, I think he was formerly at Harvard, one of the most renowned experts on AI and health computing to run the institute. So it's really exciting. But again, it's still sort of in its infancy stages. The other piece that goes with it is, and I think actually just recently Montgomery County now became the third largest biotech sort of economy in the country behind, I think we were fourth behind Boston, San Diego, and maybe, yeah, I think maybe the Research Triangle. So we're now third. And there is a huge focus. I was just at the universities at Shady Grove 2 weeks ago with the lieutenant governor, and they had a summit to bring together actually some of the smartest minds in the region, from medicine, from the corporate side, from academia, to really start thinking about how we grow this pipeline, because we have all these incredible companies that are coming to Montgomery County or are here already and trying to grow, and they just really don't have the workforce. So a lot of really interesting ideas in one of the sessions that I was in, things like really building a much more robust mentorship program that creates a pipeline for young people. Obviously the demographics of our county have changed quite a bit, and typically, oftentimes people of color do not see themselves in these sort of high-tech STEM fields. And so universities at Shady Grove is really trying to embark, and the university system as a whole, in a much more deliberate process in growing the pipeline, in growing the base of folks. And you have to start those really often in middle school. So there's a great partnership with MCPS, with the universities at Shady Grove, with the biotech community, the tech community. The Maryland Tech Council is really helping work on that too. So there's a couple of really great ideas that came out of those conversations that I think we're trying to put into action for next session and beyond, to really continue to lean into the biotech space that Montgomery County has become a huge leader on. The other piece is, I know our federal delegation has been just incredibly diligent in trying to get it's ARPA-H, which is essentially the federal government's advanced research program that they're trying to do specifically for healthcare. So it's modeled off of the Defense Department center that everybody credits, for the internet, if it's not Al Gore. And so we feel like Montgomery County, especially with the Institute of Health Computing, would be really well positioned with that, with the NIH, with the FDA, to compete for ARPA-H. And so I know that's something the federal delegation has been really singularly focused on. And at the state level, we've been trying to figure out what we can do to support that and make sure that they get everything they need at the national level.
Great. Anyone else like to add to? Thank you for focusing on that. Another wonderful topic is housing. So where jobs are, and housing is needed, and vice versa. So affordable housing is a very complex issue, and sometimes it's conflated with market rate housing, meaning just have more housing built, and that will eventually kind of solve the issues. So our community has had various discussions around how to address the housing shortage. The idea that in some cases, children that want to stay in the community that they grew up in and raise their families accordingly. And we're wondering what can be done at the state level that grants municipalities like ours more authority as we have more discussions around the building of multifamily housing and all that, so that it's more in line with and compatible with our communities, and moving perhaps a little bit quicker. So what can be done at the state level for since we have our authority through the state? So
well, thank you all again. And Madam Mayor, I certainly agree with your assessment. But there's another A that you forgot in terms of housing, and that is accessible housing, because I cannot tell you, as a person with a disability, how many times friends have invited me over and I just can't go, or I have to get somebody to help me get up the stairs. I think affordable housing is the issue of our time, because I'm 36 and there's so many of my contemporaries that grew up in Montgomery County that, can't afford, that maybe even in District 18, but they can't afford to live here. If they live in Montgomery County, it's in Clarksburg or certain areas of Silver Spring that are more affordable. And in terms of the authority, I do not serve on the Environment and Transportation Committee, but I spoke last night to the new chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, Mark Corman, who's deeply committed to the issue affordable housing. And in terms of what more you can do, I would certainly be very open to ideas because we needed more affordable housing yesterday. And so I'm deeply committed to learning from you, but I will just say that I think it's important for elected officials to demonstrate humility. And I'll just say that in the Judiciary Committee on which I serve, there weren't a lot of housing issues. But what I will say is that there were a lot of important things like lawyers for tenants and constructive eviction legislation. And my friend Vaughn Stewart led the fight on numerous tenant protections for renters. But I'd love to chat with you more about specifically how I can help the town.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to? No? Okay. So we'll turn our attention to the Purple Line. And Lieutenant Governor Miller had indicated that the Purple Line will not be delivered in 2026. Meanwhile, the Capitol Crescent Trail has been closed throughout this time, much longer than what our neighborhoods had been told in terms of anticipated closure. Would you be able to work, would you be willing to be able to work with Purple Line transit partners and other areas to ensure that there are options for opening up parts of the Capitol Crescent Trail, at least during testing phases, but then also as we think about the latter parts of the construction phases, just so communities can start utilizing the trail once again?
I was going to say, actually, I had a conversation with the MTA administrator, Holly Arnold, this morning, just about that, sort of Purple Line in general. And I think you're right. My sense is there is also probably shortly to be an announcement on more of the timing around the Purple Line, but I think none of us have hopes that it will be it's going to be delivered early.
And under budget.
And this is, yeah. Hopefully when my 3-year-old is old enough to go to college, maybe he'll be able to take it for his visit to for the University of Maryland. But we remain really committed to working with MTA as a delegation, holding them accountable where we can and making sure that the town gets what it needs. So on the trail, this has sort of a sordid history. We were really excited to secure a commitment. Actually, it was literally in the Lawton Center in 2019 under the previous contractor before they left the job. Their CEO was here for a meeting, I think, with Purple Line now, and actually committed to opening the trail as early as possible. So, you may know once the majority of the construction is done, before the actual service begins operating, the train's got to go through, I believe actually it's anywhere between 12 and 15 months worth of testing. And so it's our understanding that at that point, most of the actual construction work would be done and most people could be able to use the trail. And we secured that commitment. Then the contractor walked off the job. They brought in a new contractor who would not commit to that. So literally every time I talk to Administrator Arnold and Secretary Wiedefeld, I bring this up because it's such a huge issue for our community. They cannot commit to it right now because they don't sort of know exactly. The construction schedule is still fluid, but she committed to me this morning and has reiterated this in a couple of occasions as well publicly, that they will do everything they can during that testing period when it is safe to be able to reopen the trail as early as possible. And we're gonna do our best to hold them to that. Obviously, we can't force them to, but we know how important it is. And frankly, I think many of us in this community, not just in District 18, but as Delegate Kaufman mentioned, Delegate Corman, who represents the community just across Wisconsin Avenue, is the new chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee. We've worked hand in glove on this issue. It's a huge issue, obviously, in District 16 and in Bethesda. And so we will continue to make sure that we get, as much accessibility to the trail as quickly as possible. And I mean, I can go into the horn and bell issue as well, if you'd like.
Please.
So that is another fun topic that we've spent a fair amount of time on. So some of you may know, there's obviously the tunnel that connects into Bethesda, and the original plan that the Purple Line had was that every time a train went through, there would be a loud horn that would sound, much to the chagrin of town residents and neighbors nearby. So vividly remember Barney and I sitting in my office in 2019 with then MTA administrator, Kevin Quinn. We had a great conversation. We got an agreement that they were only going to essentially activate the horn when somebody was in the tunnel. That if you were, if they had a Purple Line maintenance worker in there, they would have essentially something on their vest that would activate a safety system. And so when the train came in, the horn would sound to alert the workers. Again, the contractor walked off the job. We have a new contractor. We have, I think, 4 new iterations of staff. So we have not been able to secure that commitment, but that came up in the topic. It was a topic of conversation this morning with Administrator Arnold. She does not have a final answer yet, but they are working a plan through with their safety team. And she said she hopes to have a more concrete answer back to us by the end of the summer. So we will follow up with that. Fingers crossed. Obviously, we have a little ways to go before the actual train is running. So if what we get back in the summer is not to our liking, there's still plenty of time for us to re-engage with them, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we will get.
Did you have a sense that it's trying to be forthcoming with that, or is it completely neutral? I don't know what the answer is going to be.
I am hoping it is going to be positive. It sounded, I have a pretty good relationship with the administrator, and she's usually fairly honest with me. So I think if it had been sort of cataclysmic news, she probably would have, I hope she would have shared it with me. I don't want to get out over my skis here, but we'll see what ultimately comes back. And again, if it's not satisfactory, we have plenty of time before there's any train running and, horns are blaring every 7 minutes.
Yeah, so when we met with them, there were a lot of questions around best practices across the country. It isn't the only light rail system that runs, abutting a residential neighborhood. And we had asked for, what are those best practices? Because it can't just be 75 times a day having a horn through. So perhaps you have that documentation, or you're also discussing those types of things. But that was the kind of perspective we were taking here. We're of course making sure everyone is safe. That's a top priority. But there's the livability side of this. So,
well, and I was going to say, so I don't have that document back, but again, while there hasn't always been 100% continuity with the actual Purple Line Partners staff, so Administrator Arnold was Kevin Quinn's deputy at the time. So she was aware of the agreement that we had made. And it was, that was not a sort of fly by night. We're just going to slap something on paper. Kevin Quinn left MTA. He's now running, I think he's running the transit administration in Vancouver. He was, an incredibly well-respected, their whole team went through the process with it. So I think when the new contractor came in, there was just sort of, unfortunately, in a whole number of instances, I know not just in our community, but in other areas as well with the Purple Line, I think they just sort of, they didn't want to take anything that had been agreed to under the previous contractors at face value. And they had a lot to catch up on, which is really frustrating because we had secured a number of agreements and a number of promises in places that sort of got reset to zero. And so I think we're getting to a place now with this that hopefully we'll have something that is positive for the town.
Great.
My sense was it was Matt Collins' team that you guys today.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, in the continued churn of staff, Matt is now gone. Yes. Yeah.
Copeland Run. So behind Elm Street going into Lynn Drive of our area, just to give you a little bit of geography, prior to, for a number of years, Copeland Run has been running behind abutting people's backyards. And obviously when there was storms, it would run a little bit stronger and more. And there have been a number of ongoing discussions in the last few years about to better understand the stormwater design, the design of the stormwater management system, and various communications. Again, it could have been the old transit partners, the county, the state MDE, or Maryland Department of the Environment, and the understanding was that the stormwater management design would be such that there would be minimal impact to the Copeland Run. What some residents have experienced, though, not necessarily attributable to the drought that we're experiencing, or technically it may not be official drought yet, but nonetheless, is that it's either not running at all, or when there is a storm, it's patches of stagnant water and that could lead to some mosquito concerns. Meanwhile, the way that the system has been designed, when you curve your way towards Lynn Drive, all that water is being directed there whenever a storm would occur. So we're balancing as a community. There's concerns on the part of some residents who are like, what happened to Cold Gun Run as a protected, what does that mean kind of thing. And then the other side is, boy, if we get storms like what Vermont just experienced, I'm going to lose my, portions of my property. So we're trying to balance this out. We've communicated with various folks at Purple Line, and we can absolutely provide you all that documentation. We've communicated with Maryland Department of Environment. We've asked for a community meeting. And instead they had asked that questions be submitted instead. So we're wondering, would you as a delegation be willing to, see our documentation if you haven't had a chance, because some of you are probably well aware of the issues, and what resources, what are our next steps? Because from a town perspective, we're kind of running out of avenues to and people to talk with, but want to make sure we're responsive to our residents on all counts. So if there's, a willingness to take a look at this issue on our behalf and see what might be going on, or any sort of, programs or whatever that we could also follow up with.
Yeah, we're happy to help. So I'll take this one only because I've had a car totaled by flooding.
Okay.
And a second car that was almost totaled. And so I'm in Kensington and deal with this for the water that's flowing downhill from Connecticut Avenue towards Rock Creek. But I know exactly what you're talking about along Lynn, because I've knocked doors, I think probably 2018 after a huge storm, and you could already tell that properties were at risk. And so we're happy to work with you. And obviously the Purple Line project is an opportunity to really assess, because anytime you have new infrastructure, it's really the appropriate time to say, do we have the other infrastructure necessary to not only deal with this, but while we're here, with future increases in rainfall due to climate change and the like. So, it can get complicated, but sometimes actually you find real errors that need to be resolved. So just going back to my example, we've worked with some of the neighbors in terms of the storm flow. And it turns out that on the maps, there was a stormwater pipe that was much larger on the maps than it was in real life. And that's part of the reason the water was not going. It's just incorrectly marked. And so now we have an opportunity. Now it's an expensive fix, but we have an opportunity to go back and say, this isn't the pipe that everyone thought it was. And so as we do this exploration as a team, the four of us, we're happy to help. And if there are ways to assist and grant money that's available, we will sing it loud and proud.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I was just gonna say, Irene, Todd's been, on your team, has just been a great partner, and he sent a lot of the sort of initial communication back. So we're happy to, I think, probably be beneficial for us to sit down with the town folks to just kind of get a sense of where your heads are, and then redouble efforts with MDE and MTA to make sure that that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
It's complicated, quite right, it's complicated. Anything with water is complicated, sure. We all know because of the stormwater management design that actually stormwater is expected to be handled very thoroughly. This upper section, all the water that's on the track from the drains into the long pipe needs to be discharged, as I think was suggested by one conduit that's going to lead to Coke and Run. And so we know that the virtually no stormwater runoff whatsoever that's going to refill this upper part of the rock. This is not going to happen. That's permitted, and that's been done. But I think what residents are representing to us, and some of them here tonight didn't speak to this, of course, is that separate from stormwater runoff, there is a steady state level of flow that is no longer there.
Yeah.
And that is what we're trying to understand. Why has that steady state flow gone?
And Right, and as you said, these issues are extremely complicated. I'm Stephanie Marks, I'm a brand new baby council member. Nice to meet you all. I've done, trying to try to educate myself on purple line issues, and I've gone back and read some things, and it's not clear from anything that I've read that there ever was a real conclusion about where the water was coming from in the first place, which makes it a little hard, a little challenging to figure out how to replace the flow.
Yeah.
And of course, the remaining problem, regardless of where it came from in the first place, is that it's now it's hard to say a hazardous condition, but it's definitely posing some understandable health related challenges.
Well, I was going to say, and I saw the response that you all got back from the Maryland Department of the Environment, where they said, we can't determine where the water is coming from.
Yeah.
And then we don't want to fund the study that we think you would need to figure out where it was. So that was obviously less than satisfactory, I think, on a whole host of levels. So, one of the things that came to my mind was the town is part of a program called Sustainable Maryland that's run out of the University of Maryland College Park as I think a designated green community. Sustainable Maryland provides funding for stormwater management issues, and they provide funding for studies. So that was sort of the initial thought that came to my mind. If there is money, if we do need money to do this, but I think before we get to that point, I think the four of us are more than happy to engage with the Department of the Environment and with Maryland Transit Administration and the Purple Line folks to have a better understanding and trying to get to the bottom of what actually happened. And if we can come to a resolution that doesn't require the town to have to shell out its own money, at least to figure out where the problem is coming from.
Exactly. Great. So one last question was submitted is with respect to the Connecticut Avenue lane dieting. We've been provided with feedback that for now, the project shelved, just kind of on ice, let's worry about it on another day. Is that your understanding as well? Is that something that, I just have an idea.
Again, as a new delegate, I'm going to Transportation School 101. So I defer to Delegate Solomon on this one because he has been with us for 5 years.
So I guess I will say, even first of all, I don't think it was ever really a project. So for some of you who are on, you may remember, we worked as a team with the State Highway Administration to get them to do sort of a full corridor analysis of Connecticut Avenue from the Circle all the way up to the split with University and in Kensington. And so one of the ideas they came back with, very, very initial idea for this section of Connecticut Avenue, was taking away a lane in either direction, creating essentially a dedicated bike lane and creating a dedicated turn lane in the middle. So you'd have 2 lanes on either side and a dedicated turn lane, and the lanes would be wide enough for a bus. We hosted, I think, 3 or 4 meetings last summer by Zoom for the community, for local elected officials. We have, I think, 8 municipalities along that corridor. And I think by the last meeting, it may not be a direct quote, but they said something along the lines of, the horse doesn't even need to be beaten anymore. It's dead. We hear you loud and clear. And they made it very clear to us that it was just sort of they were trying out different ideas. It had not gone anywhere beyond just sort of internal conversation. And this might be an interesting way of fixing some of the flow issues, but they had not gone any further. They had not done any hardcore studies. They had not put any real money or, capacity behind it. So I think they heard the community very loud and clear. We recently, as a team, had a meeting with the State Highway Administration. We meet with them on a quarterly basis, just sort of as check-ins, in addition to a lot of the other hotspot issues that we have. And they're in the process of updating where there were a lot of sort of short-term fixes, things like updated signage, better painting on crosswalks, but there were some more interim safety solutions that were going to cost a little bit more money, and they were in the process of getting us an update on the timing on some of that. What they said to us was a lot of the infrastructure construction issues go back to a lack of workers and contractors. So I had sort of a funny conversation, which I said, if we gave you a blank check to do all these improvements that we've talked about, how quickly could you get them done? What would it cost? And they said, even if you gave us, $10 billion, we don't have the actual physical capacity. There's so much pent-up need for infrastructure that the workforce just isn't there. So we'll get you all an update when we get it back from State Highway Administration on the interim improvements along Connecticut. But the road diet never went really beyond those initial meetings and that initial document. So I think we're safe for the foreseeable future.
Happy about that. That's great.
I hope we won't hear that I'm not expecting signalization on East West Highway.
No, that I think I mean, that took us 3 years. So I think we've waited long enough on that one. And you got the commitment directly from the administrator. So.
We have a few minutes, but I want to ask my colleagues first if they have any additional questions come to mind. Thank you for answering any before I turn it over to the residents or.
Actually, hi, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really informative. I appreciate it. I actually want to go back to the gun issue really briefly. Does the initiative regarding sending home education materials about gun storage at public schools, it doesn't apply to private schools, right? Or does it?
No, so the legislation that we drafted last year is just public schools.
Got it. Because I was just thinking it would be great if town governments, municipalities in your district who care about that, try to help maybe urge private schools to do something similar, because there's such a prevalence of private schools in the area.
Yeah, and Stephanie, it's actually interesting. I mean, I could go back and we could have that conversation with some of the private schools and see if we could, I mean, obviously a lot of the private schools in the state, we have funds that assist private schools. So you could write it as.
There is a jurisdictional.
Yeah. And I will say this some of the school systems in the state have already done it. So, we have a very active Moms Demand Action chapter in Montgomery County, and they worked with MCPS. I don't know if it was system wide, but I know in several of the clusters, they got support from the schools to send that information out. And one of the things we were very clear on was that we didn't want to sort of leave it up to the school system. So it is going to be
essentially drafted. And
it's going to be drafted, I believe, by the Maryland Center on School Safety with the state police. And it's essentially an update on what the actual state laws are. And again, that's just sort of the floor. If a school system wants to go beyond that and send other information home, they're more than welcome to, but we wanted to at least establish the minimum that they'd be required to send out.
Great, thank you for that. That's all I have, thanks.
Just not a question, but I think we owe you a bit of an update about the development of the parks, since we are very grateful. It's not just the last $500,000, but a total of $4.5 million, if I'm right? $2.5 million that you've given to the Parks Department. I'm sorry, total of $4 million. And we now have a $1.5 million being channeled through the town. So a total of $4 million of state money. So that's great. It is proceeding, but frankly, a little more slowly than we hoped. It's been extremely painstaking to get agreements drafted from the county and the Parks Department. And the result is that the developers have now put in about $500,000 or so of money for design work that they've not been reimbursed for. So they said, before we can continue to engage this, we have to get these agreements done. And if you can't get the final agreements done, let's put in place an interim agreement. So at least we can start spending money again to continue the design work that's so important in order for the developers to put in the site plan. And so as of now, they're anticipating and they hope that they'll get the site plan submitted by December, which is another 3-month delay. But in the meantime, there still has to be work done with the county in particular to get even an interim agreement drafted and set so that money can begin to flow to reimburse the developers for what they've gone out of pocket for. So we hope we'll work through those problems near term over the next some weeks or month, but that's where it is. And I don't think there's any doubt about everyone's commitment long-term to the project, getting it done, but it's just grinding at it and trying to get the authorities to really bear down and focus. It's been a challenge.
Barney, I have a suggestion, if I may. I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
We'd be happy to have suggestions.
Of course, Jared, Jeff, Emily, and I will be happy to do anything we could, but my suggestion would, having worked at the council when I was in college, would be to reach out to Cindy Gibson, the chief of staff to council member Andrew Friedson, because I think that Andrew chairs the committee that oversees the Parks Department. And I find Cindy personally very responsive, and this is fine. She gives it out to constituents too. She can be reached at cindy.gibson@montgomerycountymd.gov. So that would be my first stop, because it's a county department. But if you don't hear from Cindy or Andrew to your satisfaction, we'd be delighted to help.
wasn't asking your support on this. I just wanted to give you a briefing on where it is. We certainly are in touch with Andrew and other people and working the traps, but it's just a matter overall of seeing some delay, which is unfortunate. And of course, delay means cost overruns, which is also going to be plaguing us, but we're working it.
Here's the other thing, and you're kind of saying this without saying it, but I'll say it. I mean, it's important to keep the pressure on because it's not often that all this many parties are in agreement. We have a situation like that in Kensington where there were 2 decades worth of hand wringing over Warner Mansion, but finally everyone's together. And when you get everyone together, it's important to move forward because you don't know how long you're going to have all the parties in agreement. And I mean, you are the government of this town. You know, it's a very diverse town with lots of different opinions, especially when it comes to development. But here we have a park and residential project that everyone's on board with and that the county executive's on board with. That doesn't happen often when it comes to some of these issues. And so we're happy, like Aaron said, to join you in trying to speed things up and get all the ducks in a row.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you all did such an absolute magnificent job engaging the community, engaging with the developer in a really constructive manner. And I mean, talking about economic development and housing, you have a project that will not only spur economic growth in Bethesda, provide housing, provide incredible green space amenities for the community. Yeah, so share your frustration. We will continue to put pressure every place we can to make sure that, and if there are additional, I know we're still having the unresolved issue of potential undergrounding of utilities that we may need some more state resources for, that we're happy to continue to go to bat for.
Thank you. Do any residents, would they like to ask any question?
Hi, my name is Beverly Hudnut, and it's not a question, but I just want to share my great joy to hear your response about the Connecticut Avenue dieting issue. Thank you.
We will convey that to the State Highway Administration.
My name is Lou Evangelista, and I want to thank you all for coming. Makes me feel very proud.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up to your purple line question. I didn't know, I haven't been like following it really super closely, but what's the status of the tunnel and the trail? Is it going under the
Yeah,
tunnel?
so this has become a bit of a fight between the county executive and the county council. So as you know, prior to closing of the trail, there was a tunnel that went underneath Wisconsin Avenue. As Jared mentions, that happens to be, not that I expect anyone to know legislative districts, but that happens to be the line between our legislative district and the legislative district to our west. And I use that tunnel all the time. I'd ride my bike to Georgetown and back, and it's a beautiful, beautiful ride. And the promise when the purple line was proposed was that that tunnel would be rebuilt and that bicyclists would be able to get underneath Wisconsin Avenue and not have to go at grade, which poses danger to them, to cars, to pedestrians, to everyone. And so there's been a notion to save money by walking back that promise. I've seen statewide just too many broken promises because if you're saying something in order to build political support for something, you have to be able to keep your word and follow through. When the ICC was built, there was a promise to have a biking trail alongside it, and that was struck to save money. There's a bridge in Southern Maryland that connects Southern Maryland to Virginia, and the promise was when they build a new bridge, they were going to build a bike lane as part of it. I don't even know how the incremental cost of a bike lane on a bridge is expensive. You know, me on a bike is, 200 pounds max. I don't know why it's so expensive, but to save money, they nixed that after making a promise in order to gain community support to build a bridge. We are all, I don't mean to get too ideological here, but the four of us are liberal Democrats. We believe in the power of government to make change, but people only trust in that larger ideological point if we keep our word on small things. And so I think it's really important that we keep our word to build the tunnel Now, with that said, I don't usually speak so expansively about something outside of our jurisdiction. It's a county cost, and they are the ones who made the promise. So they need to deliver, and Councilmember Friedson has worked aggressively to preserve that in the CIP, the capital budget.
So my name is Beth Barnett, and Irene and I were at the Kensington Town Hall meeting and this meeting, and it's really, and I'm sorry Emily isn't here because she's also, you all are very incredibly responsive elected officials, and it's an honor to have you represent us. And I wanted to let you know that the two Copeland Run issues, the one having to do with too much water and the other having to do with too little water. I think when we draw the picture, you'll see they're only related by the fact that they're related to Copeland Run. And I did want you to tell you that for the too little water, Julie and I asked our neighbors to write a letter, and we very easily got 20 signatures. So this is important to the people whose property is affected, but it also is important to the environment and to water management. So I'm really glad that you're going to help us get to the bottom of this, because I think there's just some pipe somewhere that got blocked up. And at the bottom of all these complexities, there's a very simple solution.
I was about to say, yeah, we can find the one.
There are a couple of people online, and I know we only have about a minute left, so I wanted to offer if there's anyone online. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Thank you so much for your time. We know that you're so extremely busy, and well-deserved vacation for Emily, and thank you for coming in her stead, and thank you all for your candor and your willingness to step in and fill in those blanks that we come across on a sometimes daily basis. So appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. You're welcome to stay for the rest of our town council meeting. There'll be lots of good stuff. But thanks again. Thank you all. And thank you all for coming tonight.
Thanks so much. It's an honor to represent the town.
We're just going to take, for those online, a couple minutes break so we can transition over to our town council meeting. Thank you. Call this meeting to order. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Just had a really productive meeting, I thought, discussion with our state delegates. And for those of you who may not have seen the entire session, it is available on recording. But we got through a lot of topics. So thanks to all of you as well for coming. So we're going to start with the financial report. Unfortunately, unfortunately, our colleague, Rich Brancato, who is the treasurer, is on a well-deserved vacation. He's our treasurer, but instead Todd is going to offer this month's, which happens to coincide with the end of year financial report. So Todd will take it away.
Sure, thanks very much. This is the end of fiscal year report for June. Our 2023 fiscal year ended on June 30. We're now in FY24, which began on July 1st. So this report does represent the 12th month or 100% of fiscal year 2023. According to our calculations as of now, we've received approximately 119% of budgeted operating revenue and spent approximately 87% of budgeted operating expenditures as of June 30, 2023. But just keep in mind, our financial reports are done on a modified accrual basis. The audit will be the full accrual, so these numbers are temporary until the auditor accrues all revenues and expenditures and puts them in either FY23 or FY24. Effectively, the takeaway from the year-end report is what we anticipated, and when we were doing the FY24 budget, what we would actually receive in FY23, And so the town expects to realize a budget surplus of over 2.2 million. And that's due primarily to a number of factors, larger than anticipated state distribution of local income taxes, the use of $700,000 of our 2.4 million American Rescue Plan Act grant to cover the cost of providing certain town services, substantially more interest income than we anticipated. That's generated by town reserves. The reduced need for our land use planning and development consultants, very nominal snow removal costs, and a delay in the expenditure of funds for roadway repairs and Zimmerman Park improvements, both of which are planned to be undertaken this fiscal year in FY24. As also anticipated and publicized in the election issue of the forecast with respect to the budget, and where we would end up at the end of FY23 and ultimately then at the end of this fiscal year, FY24, the town's gross general fund balance is approximately 14.8 million on June 30, 2023. And that's expected to increase to 15.8 million on June 30, 2024. Now, offsetting this balance is the town council's commitment to contribute $4.5 million to the Bethesda Market Park development project, which would result in a net fund balance of 11.3 million on June 30, 2024. And separately, the balance of restricted ARPA funds will decrease from 1.6 million, which is what it is at the end of FY23 as of June 30. To 865.9 at the end of FY24 because of that commitment, the council's commitment to use approximately $700,000 of ARPA funds in each of the successive fiscal years to cover the cost of providing town services. And that concludes my financial report.
Thank you. Do my colleagues have any questions?
Not so much a question. Thank you, Todd. I think that was very clear. Just a comment, which is, since we're gradually shifting ARPA money, essentially paying for services, but therefore, since we don't have to reach in our normal revenue stream for those services, our reserves get built up. So a sort of ARPA-derived reserve increase, if you will. If you add that in with the numbers you gave, it sounds like at the end of FY24, we'll have something like $12 million, even after subtracting the $4.5 million commitment we have to the parks, adding both proper reserves plus the remaining amount in ARPA at that time. Now, I just want everyone to appreciate that looking back, at least in the early years when I was on the council, which isn't that long ago, we thought we had an ample surplus reserves in this town when we were around $8 or $9 million. So our net reserve position is growing pretty substantially, notwithstanding the reserve of $4.5 million for the parks. So I just want people to take on board that the town is in very, very strong financial shape here.
Indeed. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Todd. So I think now it goes to the manager's report.
Sure, I'll briefly review staff activities over the last month. Staff continued to assist with several major projects, including Corso Chevy Chase redevelopment and the Bethesda Market Park project, both of which will be discussed this evening. Regarding Corso, the developer will hold a virtual pre-submission community meeting on July 25th, and notice of that meeting, which we haven't received yet, but we should receive soon. That will also be replicated by Town Crier this week, hopefully, and in the weekly updates for the next 2 weeks. We have not yet received the parking and site access studies from Corso, but we were told that we should receive them prior to the July 25th pre-submission community meeting. I'll certainly inform the council when we do receive them, but it's uncertain when we might and how far in advance of that meeting we might receive them. In addition to those projects, the staff continued to communicate with Maryland Department of the Environment officials regarding the lack of water in Copeland Run. As was discussed during the meeting with the D18 delegation, staff did receive and distribute responses to the initial set of questions the town posed regarding the issue with the lack of flow in Copeland Run. And Irene, I don't know if you'd like to discuss this topic more now, or I think we probably were satisfied with the delegation's response and their request to us. I mean, their offer to assist. We can come back to it. I can finish my report, or we can address it now, whatever you like.
Yeah, I mean, I was certainly pleased that the delegation was willing to take a look at this with either fresh eyes, fresh perspective, as well as the resources that they bring to bear that we do not. I think that it will be helpful to keep residents informed of this progress. How that takes place, whether it's in written form, discussion, or some other means. But I don't. How do you all feel so far with respect? Do you feel that having the delegation take this on and just discussing this a little bit further with them as to the history is the right point, or where are your heads at?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a discussion about this now. I think a couple of thoughts in my mind about it. One is, we know that the purple line is going to takes the view that they're doing exactly what they're required to do per the permits that MDE issued, full stop. They're not going to have any reason whatsoever that there's anything that they're responsible for. They're building it according to plan, and the plans were approved by the state. They're done. I think MDE is going to take that view that they properly have permitted it, and they were focused on stormwater management, full stop. They're not going to make any change, and they're not going to come back on anything else. But I think, and nobody's suggesting this, but when I think about the courses of action we could take, trying to somehow, go out, ask somebody else to take responsibility for this is going to be very difficult, because they're all going to feel they can appropriately back away. What I like is the idea that we bear down and just try to say, look, can we get some study that can look at this and try to determine what has happened here with this underlying steady state that seems to be gone. We understand stormwater, we got that part, but it's this fact that there's no longer anything at all in the upper part of the stream. And why would that be so? And we know there could be a number of reasons, not all of which have to involve the purple line at all. I mean, some of them could be amorphous changes in development in Bethesda and so on. We just don't know. Mm-hmm. But if there's a way to have a study that focuses specifically, unemotionally, without looking to cast blame with anybody, but to say what has happened here that's caused this change, and we could find a way to get money for that, I would welcome that being done. I think that's a useful step. Would at least find out something. And then if there's any remedial action, I don't know what that could be, but at least that study could lead us in the path of where it would be appropriate to potentially try to find something that could make a difference. I don't know what the answer would be, but I think it's a process, but I think having a study would be helpful.
Stephanie, you're shaking your head.
I agree. I don't really have anything to add to that. Like I said earlier, when the state delegation was here, and as you said, Barney, water is complicated. It's always complicated. And I don't think that any conclusion was ever really made with regard to the purple line about where the water came from. It was descriptively, it's a minor ephemeral stream that did feed into one of the small branches of Rock Creek that eventually, flows into the park itself. And the purple line permitting was much more concerned about Little Falls and the feeder streams, including underwater sources for Little Falls, than it was with Copeland. So I think facts are always good. And I think that would be great if we can find the money and figure out how to do a study.
Joy?
Yeah, I have a question about that, and maybe this is something that staff has to answer after they go and figure out what the answer to the question is. Because you just mentioned we may have enough funds to actually conduct such a study, but my question would be, would we be studying an area that the town owns or that is incorporated within the town, or would the study be outside the town's borders? And then would that impact our ability to fund a study like that?
I think we'd have to ask the people who we'd be asking to do the study, what they would draw as being the boundaries of their work in order for the study to have value. I mean, I presume that if you're looking for the sources of the underground flow, that's going to take you outside the town. I don't know how could it not. But in terms of doing a study, I don't think that should inhibit them from doing a study, even if they have to go beyond the town. But that's what we presume we would ask the consultants about.
I think we need to be a little bit clearer about what the study would be, right? Because there have been studies done in the past. Though at the end of the day, my concern is that a study may not actually, not only to your point, Barney, about not find fault, not the fickle finger of blame, but effectively what can be done moving forward. This is the state of the situation. And I don't know if that should also be called the study. Do you know what I mean? It's more, what is the set of recommendations needed? This is the state of the union as we know it. What can be done to move forward? And I think that's different than a study of like where the water was, where the water is, what may or may not have been impacted by development downtown versus Purple Line versus just something else, third thing, shifts happening underground. So I feel like we're a study to be, first of all, a company that, or an engineer or, whatever consultant be identified that would be very specific in what's even available out there. What are the options out there? Because it's entirely possible that a consultant, a study will conclude that the Copeland Run, secession of water, not much we can do about that, and yet something can be addressed from a vector control perspective, but it could go in so many different directions. And that's why I want like the state delegation to take a look at what it is that are our true options moving forward. I feel like we're conjecturing. I'm not an expert in this. I don't have the history of what happened over the last 25 years. It's changed what's happened with Copeland Run or the last 10 years, right? But I'm a little hesitant about just saying, let's just do another study and see what happens. So I want something oh, of course. Sorry, Todd. Yeah.
I think perhaps if I could recommend something, which is, delegation said they would be responsive to the town in further researching this and going back to MDE too. I mean, Delegate Solomon suggested that MDE's response was unsatisfactory in his opinion. And I was, when I first started hearing the conversation, I was under the impression that the town's focus will be on a request to the state delegation to have MDE study this further. And then based on what they might find or what they might come back with or any progress they might make in determining the cause of this, then they would be something the town could possibly engage in. But I thought it was really more focused on our ask of the state delegation to further engage MDE on the study of why this might have happened. And it sounded like Delegate Solomon was willing to do that. So I'm thinking that might be the best first step, is to let him run that to ground with MDE and see what further work they might be able to do to identify perhaps the cause of this phenomenon.
No, that makes sense. I also feel that MDE at this point is also going to be very focused on, basically saying they approved a permit. And, I don't know if I'd be happy to get them to do more work, don't get me wrong. But just as we've done before, we also ultimately felt we had to get someone who was reporting directly to the town on it. And to your point, Irene, I agree with you that almost regardless of how this has happened, if it, is the real thing we'd like to know is what solutions could potentially be there that would be feasible and actionable. I agree completely. I think obviously you'd want to have some idea of how this has happened because that could help define what solutions you're going to come up with. But nonetheless, I agree with you that the ultimate point would be to try to see if there are any feasible solutions. And I think everyone has to be aware, including the residents, that we could look at this and find out there aren't any feasible solutions. That's just going to be, that could well be the reality. They just can't pinpoint it. There's one of the points, to give you one example of the complexity of this. I recall that I think it was the county, wasn't it, Todd, who said that they thought that the clay shield might have been pierced, as I understand it. In other words, the stream water, what's the expression that's used when it's riding? Perched, thank you. That it was perched on top of a clay shield. And that if that clay shield is pierced, the water would go down through the clay rather than, flowing into the stream. Well, that may or may not be something that can be sewed up, so to speak. Maybe that's just there. And there's not much anybody can do about it. But so I think some study, but with an intent to try to get to some potential solutions. And I'm happy to, if people want to start off asking MDE to do some more work, but I would be happy to be wrong that their intent or their view about it is going to be, we gave the permit, and their focus is always going to be more on justifying what they've done than on helping us find a solution. So I'm just a little bit skeptical. Let's leave it at that.
Any additional thoughts? So for now, obviously we'll provide information to our delegation. They will follow up accordingly. We'll, I believe Delegate Solomon asked, let me see if we can get a lay of the land from staff and just to fill in if there's any gaps. And we'll follow up accordingly.
But one, maybe I misheard, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought they referred to some institute connected to the
Yeah,
university.
Maryland Sustainability, something.
So, I mean, is there any harm in our getting in touch with them and seeing if they could come out and talk to us?
I think that it probably is worth bringing up once again to the delegation. Is this, do they want to be the ones that put us in touch? Do we, all of that, just to make sure whoever does it.
But the point is, why not get somebody else involved who might see this as an interesting
Absolutely.
bit of academic work that could actually be quite valuable?
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that? Okay, Todd, rest of the report.
All right, great. I'm going to ask Dave to jump in here after I read the next three. We continue to manage town park and waterway improvement projects, including Zimmerman Park redevelopment or renovations, I should say, and Copeland Run stabilization. Dave also worked with the town's civil engineer to develop some concept plans for spot-specific stormwater management improvements on several town streets, and also continue to plan for the installation of additional storm drain inlets at Oak Ridge Avenue and Maple Avenue. Dave, do you want to give a brief update on those?
Sure. Yeah, I guess for Copeland Run and Zimmerman, we're sort of stuck in bureaucratic hurry up and wait mode. For Copeland Run, I think I reported last month that the project permit had been kicked over to the Army Corps of Engineers. Our engineer has reached out to the contact that we were given there 3 times now and gotten a cursory, hey, I'm in receipt of it, but we haven't gotten any update. We don't have any indication they've actually looked at it. And so we don't even have an idea of the timeline of what that review might take. We've also hit a little bit of a slowdown with getting.
Excuse me, Dave, just to go back on that, but this has to do with the discovery of a bat, which is in the vicinity. And what actually, what has to be demonstrated? What's the metric there? What are they going to, what do they review to conclude in order to still allow us to go ahead and do this?
My understanding is that they come out and they see if there are any indications that there's the bat habitating in the area. They could possibly restrict the timing during which we could cut down trees and put conditions on the work to make sure that we're not interfering with the bat habitat as part of the project.
So the issue is a matter of controlling the timing of when the project is done, but they wouldn't say no, or could they actually say no?
Yeah, I don't think they would say no, but I think it's just putting conditions on it just to make sure that if there are bats, I don't know if it's a relocation or just a working to make sure that they're not disturbed.
This
Um,
also impacts, this came up with the East-West Highway Crosswalk project with
Yeah.
the full signalization option that everyone, the county, the state and the town as well agreed was the better option. Because it was option 2, which is 2 signals, one at the crosswalk itself, another one for Edgevale. That is also the long-eared bat situation is also affecting the study of, because of the trees along East-West Highway, they might also be using that as part of their habitat too. So it's affecting 2 different projects potentially in terms of delay.
Yeah, I was talking to an engineer friend of mine over the weekend, and he said that this sort of came up suddenly, and all of the pending projects that have been approved in the area all sort of got kicked over at once. So I'm sure there's just a backlog of projects and reviews. But I'd like, so we
In
haven't gotten
compassion
any.
to my colleagues and our guests, I will refrain from punning on otherwise comes to mind.
Yeah, there's the other update on Copeland Run. I sent the entry agreement and maintenance easement to the property owners of parcel A and 7504 Lynn Drive. I think there are 8 people that need to sign it. And I've gotten signatures back from 2 of them. And I followed up with a second email, and I don't know if people are out of town, but I guess I'll start making phone calls and really start I guess press them to get those signatures done, because without that agreement, we can't do the project. For Zimmerman, the WSSC issues that we discussed in June have sort of been resolved. They've agreed to allow us to put flagstone on the pathway with a revised agreement, just indicating that if they end up coming in and replacing the pipes, they'll put concrete sidewalk down, and then we'll just have to retop it. So that seems like it's going okay. We still have not heard from State Highway Administration about their review of the improvements in the SHA right away. We're waiting on forest conservation approval from Park and Planning. That's been sitting in Park and Planning for a couple months, and we haven't gotten our final sign off on that. And the DPS stormwater management review is ongoing, and we haven't gotten that approval yet. So those are.
Are we waiting from the same SHA group that we're interacting with on the East-West Highway project? Like, can we feed 2 birds with 1 seed when we talk with?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same right of way.
Yeah. Is it the same people involved? And
I'm not sure who you've actually been talking with, but we can, Jason at Clark Azar has been doing that outreach. So I will find out who he sent it to and see if we can escalate it through the district engineer or through your people. But
Kudos on getting finally WSSC. That's big. That could have slowed us up for another year. So
Yeah.
Thank you for having.
so the easements aren't
Thanks
signed,
for having
but
persevered.
seems like they're in process, and there shouldn't be any issues.
Real progress. That's good.
Yeah. Other projects, said working with Clark Azar to do conceptual design of a new storm drain line running up Leland to be probably installed following the water main replacement work, which is going to be done this fall. WSSC anticipates starting that water main replacement work on Thornapple Street between Meadow and Connecticut in late August, followed by the work on Leland Street. So that'll be late summer through the fall, and then we'll have everything ready to hopefully repave and restore and probably put that storm drain line in the spring of next year. Other projects, we received a conceptual plan for the new water line vault replacement project on 46th Street. So I'm working with those project engineers to look at the location of that and figure out a traffic control plan, because that block of 46 is going to have to be closed for a little bit of time when that's under construction.
The entire block, so not even a one-way type of situation.
Yeah, they'll be able to preserve access to the driveways for the residents that are there. But they're going to have to close the street when they're actually pouring the concrete frame of the vault.
46th Street or on Leland?
On 46.
46,
It'll be
okay.
probably one lane closure on Leland with flags
Okay.
to bypass that, but 46 is gonna have to be closed for a while. And we're proposing to use Walsh as a detour, but with the evening entry restriction there, they might need to come to the town to lift that temporarily or find
long?
another detour.
How long would that segment of 46 be closed?
It's probably a couple weeks. It sort of was a section at the beginning and then a section at the end. So it's not permanently closed, but it'll be some time as they're
And
building
what's
it.
the timing of that expected closure?
They're hoping, and it sort of relates to how quickly the Purple Line project that is driving this project get scheduled, but they think it will be probably sometime in late August.
Right when back to school?
Right, with back to school, exactly.
So, so we're working through that. And then lastly, the county contractor has done the investigatory work on the new storm drains on Maple and Oak Ridge. The county's initial plans had some conflicts with some of the buried utilities. So they've done some test pitting in those locations and prepared a design that they've sent to the county for pricing and approval. And once the county signs off on that, then they'll schedule it as they get a crew that becomes available. So
And
Thanks,
the
Dave.
county's paying for that or we're paying for that?
the county's paying for that. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions and we'll keep them moving.
Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you, Dave.
They've also got some sidewalk repairs completed on Aspen Street and some other spot locations around town in the last month. And I also met with the Public Services Committee to discuss their slow down and stop campaign. I provided some history of what the town has done with respect to traffic calming and pedestrian safety efforts, and provided also some thoughts about or regarding additional available resources for such a campaign. Staff continue to assist with organizing the anti-Semitism resolution among county municipalities, which will be discussed this evening. We renewed our service contracts for FY24 and prepared for the FY23 audit. We processed several speed hump requests, one of which will be in front of you for a public hearing in September, and continue to provide project support to town committees. And that concludes the manager's report.
Thank you. And I just want to say the website looks great. It's it's nice. It's fresh look to it and pleasant, very pleasant. So thank you for that. Any questions or comments for Todd? All right, great. So now we'll enter into public comments. Anyone has, and there are a few people online as well. Not having to do with the variance, but any public comments? Okay, I don't see anyone. And now we'll go into the variance. Yay. Is Ron on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Ron. Nice
Hello.
to see you again.
Thank you.
So this is a
So-
continuation from variance from last month, and there have been some updates. Thank you, Mr. Shipler. Thank you for joining us this evening. So Ron, I'll take it over to you.
Sure. There has been a staff report entered into the record. One email was received with respect to the modified request, and that has been attached to the staff report. 3 letters received for the last hearing, the June hearing, are also in the record. The hearing will begin with a presentation of the revised request by the applicant. After that, the council will have the opportunity to ask questions. Following that, anyone else who's here tonight that would like to make comments or ask questions will have the opportunity to do so. The applicant will then have a brief opportunity for rebuttal. the record will close and the council will deliberate and entertain a motion directing me to prepare a decision. If the request is granted, please note that it'll take about 5-10 days to write up that request, and the decision is not final until it's in writing. So with that, Ms. Gerlach, we'll go to you, and if you could please step up to the podium.
Hi, well, once again, I guess I don't really understand the process here because I have not seen a staff report or an email. Was I supposed to get those?
It was, thanks, the email that David Chipler sent in response to you, I forwarded.
Today?
Council, prior to the notices.
I didn't receive it. Okay. Anyway, I think my application is basically the same with the exception of the measurement. My contractor addressed what I thought were the issues that the Shiplers had in terms of removing any dirt, blocking any drainage holes, so they're not even weep holes in the wall. And in addition, the contractor put a metal barrier on the property line and added drainage rocks on my side. So I believe it's even better than it was before. And I hope it resolves the issues. I thought Dave Walton came to look at it and took some pictures. Yes.
I did.
So I think everything's okay. I mean, I'm hoping everything's okay. So.
Thank you. Yes, that's good. Do my colleagues have any questions or comments? Okay. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Shipler, would you like to make a statement?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think Kristen has addressed my concerns, which were primarily about drainage. So that metal barrier that she described with the river stone between the barrier and the wall, it's not perfect. It might not work. It might overflow, but I think it's about as good as we can get, given the situation. So the email that you referred to is only one email, and that was the one I sent for the last hearing, which outlined the situation in my proposed compromise. And I think the compromise has been pretty much implemented, as far as I can tell. I really think that let me put it this way. There may be a governance and a code enforcement issue that the council would want to consider about whether a property owner who violates a variance terms ought to be able to come back and get that violation codified or approved ex post facto. But that is a larger question, and I would not advocate that you deny the variance. I think that I really don't object to the variance, the second variance being given. I think that the inconvenience to me from an aesthetic viewpoint really is minor compared to the disruption that it would mean for Kristen to have to tear down the wall or tear down part of the wall. So my position now is fine, go ahead and grant the variance. I think it's too bad that it got tangled up this way, but it is what it is. So I think the drainage problem has probably been addressed as well as it can be, and that was my main concern. And the council, I don't think, should force the property owner, Kristen, to remove the wall or part of the wall. That would really be causing her a lot of hardship, which I don't think is warranted in this situation.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments? Great, well, open it up to my colleagues for any conversations, comments, perhaps a motion.
Oh, I'd like to hear from staff, your inspection of the site and final assessment of the impact of the work.
Yeah, I guess I'm not an engineer, but I was by the site, and the the fill soils that were on Mr. Shipler's property were removed, and all of the drain holes and weep holes that were in the wall have been filled with concrete. So, I don't think that there's going to be water directed onto that property as a point discharge. It still is downhill from, Underwood does slope down toward the rear yard of Thornapple, but I don't think there's anything that's been done there that's going to increase runoff from the pre-construction condition.
Could I ask a question about that, Dave? I'm sorry, I didn't understand that the pipes had actually been sealed with concrete. I think they empty into this little kind of spillway, you could call it, that's filled with riverstone. So the water, as I understand it, will still come in to that area. So they haven't actually been sealed off, but I think it's as good as can be obtained. I mean, there's a metal barrier, as Kristen described, that prevents the water from spilling onto our property, at least unless it overflows. So that's my understanding. You understand that they were actually sealed with concrete?
They were, yeah. I was out and took a look, and they were all sealed and then reparged.
Oh, well, that's news to me, because the contractors that were working there told me they weren't going to do that, but anyway.
Okay. So.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
To make a comment, I think in these kinds of cases, one of the values of these variance processes is to encourage the neighbors to work together to work things out. And that seems to be the case here. And that's good news. Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, these can be difficult they're difficult projects to start with. Water is water is water, but I appreciate the neighbors and working together to come to a mutually agreeable solution. So thanks for that. Would anyone like to entertain a motion at this time?
I'll move to approve the variance.
Right. A second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Great. Vote. Aye. Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Unanimous, not unanimous, excuse me, 4 with 1 abstention, I guess.
Absence.
Absence. Yes. It is approved. You're all set. Thank you. Okay, what are we up to next here? We're up to discussions. First up is Corso, which is a little bit easier. We're going to be having a virtual meeting with the developers on Tuesday, July 25th at 7 p.m. And as Todd mentioned, we've not yet received advanced materials that will be presented, but if we receive anything, we'll let the residents know as well, but hopefully all can join. This is all part of the process that the developer needs to undertake in order before they submit the site plan themselves. So this is what they have to do. So we're always good to be a part of it. Any discussions around that we want to?
I don't think much. I think Todd correctly pointed out, we haven't seen the traffic or studies. There's no further work on, at least we know of, correct me, Todd, if there's something else that's happened with stormwater management, which is another issue we want to follow closely, but
yes,
I'm not aware of anything further. The only thing I do request is that we make sure we run the commercial several times with standalone town criers about the event on the 25th. We want to make sure that residents, especially because it's the summertime, want to make sure residents have plenty of opportunity to learn about the fact that they can tune in and find out what the more advanced plans are. That the
do we
developers
want a
have.
special notification to the residents that directly live right around the area, maybe a letter or something like that, just letting them know?
Are they obligated to do anything? I'm wondering about that.
They're required to drop separate notices to all
Abutting property owners, aren't they?
all abutting property owners within a half a mile, I believe it is, of
Yeah.
the site, including municipal governments. So let me check on that and I'll find out.
But anyway, separate that, I think we just want to make sure we run a town crier several times so that people can tune in if they wish to.
And is Councilmember Friedson still planning to attend?
Don't know, but he ought
Oh.
to know about it. Let's make sure he knows about it.
I understood that he was interested to attend. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, from
I think, yes, he is interested. Yes, he is.
Okay, and
But
has there,
I didn't know whether that was a commitment to attend, but just, yes, he's interested in
okay,
principle.
okay, so we're going to also let his office
Yeah,
know
yes,
about the
absolutely.
meeting. And then section 3, we anticipate that there'll be residents attending as well from their end. Okay, great.
And section 3 will get notified separately as well, as will section 5 and Chevy Chase Village and all those within a half mile of that property.
Mhm. Okay. Bethesda Market Park, our favorite.
Her favorite topic,
discussion.
yeah. My colleagues have a couple of emails that I've sent around with information on it recently, but just to offer some summary. There's a broader activity that's being undertaken and then a very specific issue that's arisen. The broader activity is that, as we reported before, the initial plans that came back were several $1 million above the budget. I don't think many of us were surprised, but Parks Department was very concerned, and they wanted an effort to try to cut the cost before they had a public review of the plans. So a number of items have been identified that could potentially be reduced in cost. Some of that is simply because the cost estimates were wildly excessive to begin with and can be cut back and not actually reduce whatever, the bit of infrastructure at all. In other places, cuts could be made that would not change the function or the value of the amenity at all. To give one example of that, the landscape architects had planned something like a 20-foot wide walkway along Willow between the market and the park, and 46th Street. And we sort of don't think that you need to have a 20-foot wide walkway there. It could be 10 feet perhaps, and that should be fine. So those sorts of things are being looked at. Also to reduce the amount of lighting that have been planned, which seemed to be excessive and actually potentially disturbing to residents. So those are a series of changes that are being looked at closely. But in order for that to be incorporated, the landscape architects have to go back to work and start the next round to make revisions to the plans that otherwise would have been the plans used on June 14th when the initial date was set. And at this point, the developers spoke up, EYA and Bernstein, and said, tools down. We're out over $500,000 from our own money for these designs. We were okay leading that effort and going along, if you will, without reimbursement, when we felt that we would have agreements with the county and the Parks Department memorializing their commitment to reimburse us months ago. But we've seen very, very slow work. No progress has been made materially, and therefore, we now feel that for us to continue spending money on the on the development and on the third parties doing design work, we have to have an interim agreement in place that allows us to be reimbursed for where we're out of pocket, even while we're waiting for the final agreements to be done. So they drafted up this interim agreement that's been sent around, and there have been 2 subsequent meetings among the partners, one 2 weeks ago and another just earlier today. The Parks Department, and this is my characterization, but Irene, speak up, or Todd, if you have a different view. Parks Department, I think, has been quite forthcoming, and they've said, look, you're right. This is taking a long time, and you are owed this money, and your interim draft agreement looks pretty good to us. And they've also now taken the time to review the invoices that the developers have, and they seem to agree with that. So they're ready actually to move forward and to sign something so that money could begin to flow back to the developers, and the developers would start up the work with landscape architects again. On the other hand, with the county, we just heard today basically 3 issues. One, that there has to be a careful legal agreement, and that has to determine. First, they have to review the invoices themselves, and they haven't done that. But they've agreed to a conference call tomorrow morning, and Todd will be able to join that, and Irene and I can join for pieces of it, where the county will have a chance to go through the numbers and hopefully agree that they're legitimate expenses, but they have to go through that process. So that's one issue. The second issue is that the interim agreement that the Parks Department thought was basically fine. The county attorney, Vicky Golf, has all sorts of trouble with. So those issues have to be worked out. And that could also lead to their wanting to know what will be the position of the town to reimburse the county under this interim agreement in respect to our share of the cost. So we may have to take that up with them. The third issue, which is perhaps the most concerning because it's the first two weren't such a surprise, but the third really kind of rocked a lot of us, which is a statement by Joe's Tamina, who's the head of the parking lot districts and reports to Chris Conklin, that the money that the council approved from general obligation bonds can only be used for actual construction of the garage, but cannot be used for the designing of the garage. This had never been said before to anybody in the whole process of our work on this project. And therefore, they're saying we anticipated that all of the soft costs, such as the design costs that have been incurred to date, were going to be paid for by intergovernmental funding, which essentially means the town of Chevy Chase. I spoke up and said this was absolutely not our understanding. Nobody has ever said to us that GO bonds could only fund construction and couldn't fund design work. And furthermore, the agreement that we've been negotiating and a point on which we have agreed with the county is that the funding would be 50-50 up to the point where we have made our contribution at $1.1 million, which itself is generous. That's actually much faster than the pace of construction. So I was quite firm with Joe's saying this is simply inappropriate. And I couldn't even understand his logic. And we pointed out the language that had been approved by the county council, which certainly did not reveal any separation of costs between construction versus preliminary work. So anyway, I'm just sort of babbling on here, but that's all that just came out this morning. So that's why it's on my mind. We have to, Joe's promised that he would look into this and determine what they can do to try to find a solution to the problem. But the fear, and this is really the main concern, is that we are now in a day-for-day delay. The landscape architects have to do a certain amount of work to memorialize the changes in costs, whatever they may be, even if they're not major. They're not going to start work till this is resolved and some payment begins to flow to the contractor, to the developers. And meanwhile, the developers have already said to us, on the assumption they thought that all this interim agreement would be placed by mid-July, they've already said that they now anticipate that the filing of the site plan is going to slip from September till December. So now we're looking at a situation where the day-for-day delay is going to cause a slip from mid-December on into the beginning of 2024. So anyway, I think Todd and Irene would share this. Part of the concern of this was this apparent lack of concern on the part of the Department of Transportation to the fact that they're holding this up and causing this further delay. And the point that I made to the group is delay is money. I mean, the longer you delay, the more expensive the project is going to become. The cost overrun problem is going to become more serious. So this is really material. So anyway, that's where it sits. We hope that we'll have some better news over the next few days, but we may have to get creative and think about workarounds on how we can potentially get money flowing here so that the parks, the landscape architects can get back to work.
Yeah, it's frustrating for me. My personal is there's no contracts in place with anybody. So the town has not, agreements. I say contracts, agreements that have been signed, and you can always, when there's a question like this that comes up, you go back and say this is what we all signed. There's none of that signed right now, and the county attorney's office, the person who has been assigned to this project that has had this for months and months and months, all these different draft agreements, is retiring on July 31st. And we asked today and have been asking for months now, who is the replacement? Who is the transition person? Who, because this is a lot of moving parts at best, and no one has been assigned to their knowledge. And there isn't really this, so when are you going to come up with this person, and it could take even months after this lawyer's retirement until someone is assigned to this project. So meanwhile, we wait, and meanwhile, trying to think of creative solutions to keep this going, despite, this apparent lack of just apathy. So it's frustrating.
I really appreciate the amount of work you, Irene and Barney, are putting into this. It's just incredible. I do have a question, though. It's regarding what do you know about the developers' plans for the actual housing that they're going to be building on the site adjacent to the parks? Like that presumably is proceeding apace, and is any of that impacted by the delay in building the parks?
Yes, it is. The site plan has to be comprehensive. They can't file a site plan without a plan for the parks and the garage. So I don't know the status of their work in planning any more detailed design of the two buildings. But whatever that status is, they can't file that on a standalone basis. If they're going, they have to file the entire project at once. So
Are
all of it
we
has to be
sure
done.
about that?
Yeah.
That in this case, that
The only thing they could do, which is their ultimate power, is they could just say, we're not going to do the big project. We're going to retreat and put up just the tower and refurbish the farm women's market, and we'll back away from the public-private partnership, and we'll let the park sit stay as surface parking lots. They have that option. They could pull the plug on this anytime and just say, life's too short, and we're just going to do a smaller project. But if they stay with the larger project, and to date that they have, and there's no suggestion that they're falling back to this other more plan B, but I'm just saying that's out there. That's not, that's in the realm of possibility. But as long as they stay with the current plan of doing the parks as well as both of these buildings, they have to submit a site plan that includes development of the park as well. They can't just go in, here's the buildings, and then 2 months later come in with the parks. That's
I
my
haven't seen
understanding.
anything with respect to the residential buildings, though. I personally haven't seen anything. So we keep plugging away. I'm getting a little bit of feedback here.
Well, there's just a lot of feedback here. You got it. Okay.
There we go.
One other thing is Todd sent around a note to, we want to make sure that Steph and Joy and Rich know, is that we had proposed some time ago that there be a visit from all the parties to Met Park, which is this new park connected to the Amazon headquarters that's been built in Arlington. And guess what? It's 2.5 acres. And guess what? It's $14 million. And guess what? It has many of the same amenities that are being planned for our parks. So we said, let's have a common field trip. And part of that, frankly, was to, have a more, since all these other meetings are on Zoom, is actually to have face-to-face, get to know each other. Let's, talk this through, have some walks. So anyway, that's being organized. And we just found out this afternoon that it's going to be August 15th from 9 to 11. Is that right?
I don't remember.
It's going to last more than 2 hours, but I know that both you women have full-time jobs. So we hope that you could join, but in the event you can't, I think we should certainly offer another opportunity for a tour. Okay. Anyway, so and the other thing we want to do as well is because Todd was great. He found out that in Arlington County there are 5 or 6 different splash parks, and so it'd be good for us to visit 1 or 2 of those as well. I don't know if we can do that the same day, but we ought to be familiar with just what this interactive water feature, other than being a buzzwords, what does it actually comprise and what does it look like? And it would be nice for us to be more familiar with that.
And if we can't wait till then, there's apparently an interactive water feature being installed in front of Anthropology. That's what it says on the sign, along with additional seating and landscaping, all that. Apparently, because we asked parks about, what's this interactive water feature, and they're not responsible for the building of that little area in front of Anthropology. Is probably taken up by the developers themselves. So we'll track down some more information there, but that's supposed to be in place by the end of July. So who knows? We can always go down and just see that one.
And I did reach out to Federal Realty, and they're responsible for that. I was put in touch with the development team point on the project, and probably will connect with him tomorrow.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
great. That's great.
Awesome.
Might not be a bad idea to ask them to make just a thought, make them have, if they come to make a presentation to us. I think it'd be nice to hear what they,
Well,
what
what
they're
I'd
doing.
like to know is how are they getting at, dealing with this whole testing of the
Yeah,
water once an
exactly.
hour, because unlike Virginia, I don't know if Virginia is having those same regulations that Montgomery County is with respect to interactive water feature and having it tested every so often. So it would be nice to see it in terms of just what they look like, but it's possible it's apples and oranges if Northern Virginia doesn't have to worry about those testing.
I agree with that. I think
yeah.
that's why I'm saying it'd be great to hear from these guys and have them tell us about their experience.
One of the parks, if people are going to go look at water features, one of the
Clement
parks
Johnson.
that I would really recommend looking at, even though it's much larger than what we're doing, is Clement Johntree Park. If you haven't been there,
It's called Clemmy Johntree.
And Clemmy Johntree. It's a mashed together word made of last names of people who were the
First name,
time-
actually, I used to live up the street from
Okay.
Clemmy Johntree before moving into the town. It's in McLean on Georgetown Pike. And there was a family who owned this parcel of land, and the Clemmy Johntree is an amalgamation of their 4 children's first names. And what's special about this park is specifically for physically challenged children. And so it's all about inclusivity before inclusivity became
It's true.
a thing. But I didn't realize they have an interactive water feature
Well,
because
I'm
there's a
not
pond,
sure-
but there was no, yeah.
That isn't what I was going to say. Actually.
Oh, okay.
I think there might be an interactive water feature, but even if there isn't, I would actually suggest going by because of the accessibility features of that
Great
park,
idea.
to see if it sparks any ideas for us too. Because everything about that park is accessible, both
Absolutely.
for children who are differently abled and adults who take care of them. It's pretty great.
From blind children to, other physical challenges, they can all have fun at this playground. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. Anything else about, we'll just keep plugging away, but this is, we'll need to think of some creative solutions around this to keep this project going.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule out that we might ask for a work session or something, between now and September, that we may have to meet again to talk about what we do.
Well, we do have the August, third Wednesday of the
Which-
month
Okay,
already on the calendar for.
all right.
for-
Well,
so
that's good
that-
to know.
that's an
May have to
option.
need a separate date, but that's good to know we have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, the anti-Semitism resolution. So we have 13 municipalities that have signed on to the resolution without, kind of changes or whatever. Then section 3 had taken what was the draft version that we had, made some changes and published that as their own resolution. So there's a bit of an asterisk of like, what did they actually, they didn't really sign on to the original one, but they made up their own, which is fine. The whole point is to have discussions around anti-hate and anti-Semitism. So including us as a signatory, that comes to 13 without section 3 or 14, including section 3. I know that there's a couple of outstanding, they may sign, that might be 1 or 2 additional municipalities. Is that right, Todd, that you're waiting on, or have we heard from just about everybody?
We've heard from everybody.
We've heard from everybody. But we did get Rockville. It's not as if it's all small municipalities here. So we're, wanted to have a discussion about, is it time to now start putting together programming, just stick with what we have, make sure that it gets announced, look at all of these different communities that have signed on to this resolution. piggyback on, if you will, to the county council's own act around this, so that there's just more awareness that municipalities are getting involved, and then, you know, encourage the start of this programming, not only within the town, but other municipalities as well, and sharing that information. So our residents that may not have a chance to attend one event might have a chance to attend another. So just wanted to have a discussion about these next steps. Like, is it time to close this down and move on?
Public, so is the plan to have a public announcement about it? at some
We
point, or
absolutely, we should. I don't know exactly what form that would take, but we certainly, with the resources of something like a Rockville and others, we would be able to, you know, do
Feels
that
like
as
with
addition
the
to us.
Jewish holidays coming up, presumably starting in
Yep.
late September, something good to aim for.
True.
I think we might, I'm just brainstorming here, but first of all, the two of the municipalities are Rockville and Gaithersburg. So that's really big that they're both, two of the three big ones are here. And we've given up on Tacoma Park. They just won't respond. I think that unless Section 3 is willing to proceed with the initial plan, the initial resolution implying some commitment for a program or supporting programming, it doesn't even actually have to be in their own jurisdiction. They just have to be cooperative in more general terms. I would not suggest that we include them, because it really is off. I think we all felt that in doing this, we wanted there to be some actual concrete action. And actually, one of the reasons why I think we got some traction from some of the other municipalities was because of that. They didn't want to just say some nice words. So I think the message back to Section 3 is either you sign up the way it is, or, you know, we just won't mention you. I don't know if you already had that conversation, Todd or Irene, but
I have.
concur.
She said
Okay.
she was going to get back to the council chair, and she never got back to me. So unless,
Okay. Well,
Like,
maybe
direct-
Irene, you want to reach out to Susan
Yeah.
Manning directly. You know,
Okay.
you don't have to go through Andy Hardy for everything.
right.
But I think it might be useful to get back to Andrew. Well, first, I think you might want to send this to the 13 with the signatures, letting everybody know who are the other people who signed, because I don't think they even know that yet. So I thought that's a clear first step that you might want to take.
Bethesda signed? Is that
Bethesda's not a municipality.
They're
a
not.
municipality?
No, they're not even,
Look at me. I
they don't
didn't even
have
know that.
any representation.
They're
It's
just, they're
Bethesda only.
unincorporated in Montgomery County,
Yeah.
as is Silver Spring.
Learned something new.
Anyway, but it might be, for in terms of PR, might get in touch with Friedson's office, because he very much wants to be involved in this. And I think having an event which brings out the collaboration of the municipalities that have signed up to follow on with what the county itself had done, I think is good, sort of knitting it all together. And also that may be a more assured way for us to get some publicity out of this from, what's now called MoCo 360 or anybody else. So I offer that as a thought as to how to go forward.
We'll follow up. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question. One is, is community relations planning any events, or is this going to be part of the brainstorming that you all have for, for 2024, FY 2024?
I think it'll be part of the brainstorming that we'll have. I mean, we shouldn't wait on us to do more of a general announcement that involves Andrew Friedson and everything. But yeah, I think absolutely that's on the list.
Yeah, I think something like, the gun violence
Right.
talk
Exactly.
that we had, that was just, it was really informative. I thought it was really good. If we had one or more of those events, and if we are able to sort of amplify what else is going on in other places, what are our schools doing? What's happening at, any other community events, would be helpful if we could just continue to sound that.
You probably want someone in CRC to take leadership work on this, because I think there are resources that are listed. In fact, in the last part of it's not part of the resolution proper, but the last part of it lists some different resources that can be accessed to get names of speakers and other people who'd be willing, other ideas for events.
Yep. Great. So that was the last council discussion on the agenda, but I wanted to bring up one more item. I had a discussion the other day with one of our friends over at East Bethesda Civic Association. Now, there's a few residents that are involved in an IAC, which is kind of a design, what's being built down in Bethesda in accordance with the Bethesda plan and the design standards. And we have a few residents involved, including Deed and Ingram on that committee, as is this individual from East Bethesda. And one of the topics that was discussed was that the Folger Pratt building, the one at 7126 Wisconsin, when that's built, which is going to be a combination of retail space and housing above that, it's going to tip the scale in terms of the soft cap with the amount of square footage of buildings that can be built in accordance with the Bethesda plan. So there's a soft cap and there was like this hard ceiling. And the soft cap is, I think, at 30.4 million, something like that. So that project is going to bring it over, the scales over 30 to 30.4. According to the Bethesda plan, once you get to a point where it's past the soft cap, but getting towards the hard cap, the county council can get involved to make amendments, to put in conditions, to, it's not saying that there'll be a whole new master plan. That's not the point. But it is taking into account that, there's growth occurring. And one of the items that was brought up was that in the Council of Governments, when there was, how many housing units need to be built in the entire county, the number was something around 31,000. And Bethesda's portion of that was 3,500. And that meant between the years of 2020 to 2030, 3,500 units needed to be built. Well on our way to making that happen. We're way, we're like gold stars. Yeah, exactly. Whereas in the rest of the county, and I'll give you an example, Tacoma Park at 2,500 assigned, they have not built one in this time. So obviously this is a popular area. Obviously, we're not trying to talk about putting a stop or the brakes on this, but there in the Bethesda master plan, there's discussions of, building the housing and the infrastructure will be there, parks will be there. And that is just not happening in terms of parks. That's not happening in terms of just other infrastructure areas. So I wanted to just put it to you all that now that we know that this soft cap / hard ceiling is being reached, what kinds of discussions should we be having with our county council members as we know there's going to be an amendment put in to increase the hard ceiling? What should we be thinking about in terms of livability? This is a popular area as compared to the rest of the county. That's for the county council to figure out why and how and to fix that. But how do we make sure that we are looking at it from the standpoint that makes this continue to be an attractive area, not only for investment, but for living here. And that could take place of traffic solutions where SHA needs to be an active, engaged, might look at the PIP formula because the funding that comes from that is woefully oversubscribed. As soon as the money is put in, it's already been spent, it seems. So maybe relooking at that formula. What are other things that the communities that we as the town can talk about with other Bethesda area communities to get together and think about what's the promise, what the senator was saying earlier, promises made being promises kept. So I just putting that out there.
Thank you, Irene. I think that's a really good point to bring up. I'd be happy to raise it with the Long Range Planning Committee, I think they've been involved in. But I think clearly that's the right attitude, which is what they want. The developers want the additional ceiling, which they will. what are the concessions to what further things we want to improve our state of living. Example, and I'm not saying this is inherently the case, but an example of the kind of thing to be considered is requiring a widening of Bradley at Wisconsin. And there's no question that there's land that could be taken from the country club, which they are not using at that corner. And by the way,
Agreements to.
we
allow-
have the legal agreements from the 1950s where the Chevy Chase Country Club asked to develop land in the right of way on Bradley. And they were given the permission to do so, provided they acknowledged that at any time the state needed the land, they could take it back. But anyway, I don't think that's an issue at the corner of Bradley and Wisconsin. There's nothing that's, needed there. But the point, I don't want to dwell on it, but the point is that to me is an example of the kind of thing that we could raise and say this is to be part of the quid pro quo. Obviously, the other would be additional park space. And I think while we still would trusting, notwithstanding our our frustration that our parks will happen, East Bethesda has a commitment for 2 additional surface parking lots to be turned into parks up in their area. And that needs to be absolutely done.
I was actually going to ask about that precisely because
Yeah.
I know where those surface parking lots are.
And especially because Veterans Park is being basically torn, is not going to be expanded. They've sold off the land. So I think it's a very good process for us to undertake and support East Bethesda and other communities. And I guess the question would be, is there a way to try to corral the other communities, much like we used to have with, our name just slipped my mind, the Bethesda area
Coalition.
right? To try to pull together different voices from around the area as to what people would like to see.
Mhm. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think our, in looking at that, maybe there's still some of our own ordinances we need to look at. I think a lot of residents are concerned about traffic. There's a lot more cut through traffic here. The more buildings they put up and more residences, I mean, that's just asking for more traffic. I don't know how any of that is impacting the water that's flowing through the town between Wisconsin and Connecticut, but perhaps that's also something we could look at as our own, have staff kind of starting to look at our own ordinances to determine, if we're prepared for more of this development. And as we kind of tee that conversation up with some of these other communities, maybe at some point we need to engage residents as well to find out, what are their concerns, so we can, intelligently represent them when we're going outside.
Yeah, agreed.
If this makes any sense, I think that, apropos of the discussion we were having earlier this morning, or this evening, it seems like this would also be an opportune time to encourage whoever the appropriate stakeholders are, whatever the appropriate bodies are, to look really hard at making sure that we are doing resilient and sustainable development. I am worried about water in this area. I don't know that Edgemore is having the same problem that the town of Chevy Chase does, but I have not spoken to a neighbor in the town who does not have some form of a problem with drainage. And I don't know for sure that it's a result of, increased density in the area, but it usually is. That's usually at least part of it. And I think it would be great if we could, as neighbors and developers and, people who are generally in favor of sustainable development, if we could kind of get on the same page with regard to what kind of infrastructure we really need in order to avoid what could become at some point, as we've seen in other parts of the country, really severe flooding problems.
Well, when the SPP was being, discussed 18 months ago or so, and these infrastructure questions came up, not only from a stormwater standpoint, but, school capacity, and the fire and the volunteer fire and rescue and how that's going to be aligned. And the answer always was, we don't, where's the revenue going to be, right? First, bring in the tax revenue, i.e. through housing, and then, the rest the infrastructure will follow suit. And obviously in this area, it's just not there yet. So I agree. We have to bring that all back to the table and say, this has done its part. Let's make sure they're coming up with some goods. And okay, so think about it a bit more, and we can start engaging on this in September.
Yeah, good. Well, Steph, to your good point, one of the aspects of the plan is it did set out requirements for open space and drainage around the new buildings. And Gwen Wright, the former head of the planning department, represented that the new buildings going up actually would create more permeable space than the buildings that they were replacing, even though they're much higher. But the way they'd be designed would be to let more. Now, I don't know to the extent to which that's been abided by or followed through. But anyway, that was the thought at the time. But I guess I'm raising it now because that is something else that could also be put on the list for us to look at, which is what are the requirements for stormwater drainage from the new construction? And does that have to be reconsidered or potentially tightened?
I mean, also Montgomery County has a relatively new version of its sustainable development plan that's supposed to be 2023 through 2027. And I think it would be worth looking at that and see if that gives us a hook to get in touch with the county folks and say, we've built X amount, developers are going to be asking for a raise on the hard cap, and consistent with the county's sustainability and resilience goals, we feel like we need to maybe take a more holistic look at where we are.
Yep. Anyway, that's all I have there. Any other topics for this evening before we close things out? Okay, I guess we are closing things out. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Have a great evening. Yep.
Hope your foot gets better soon.
Thanks. I was muted. Sorry. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.